Hi guys, and welcome to our fourth and final Q&A. This one is all about this guy, Occy. He's my best mate. I've had him since he was 8 weeks old and he's now 7. We've just recently entered El Salvador, which is Occy's 7th country. He's a bit of a world traveler. And today I'm going to talk to you or answer a lot of your questions about what it's like living with Occy in the van and in such a small space. So if I didn't get to your question in this one, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I tried to answer the most popular questions and as many as I could without making this too long. So question number 1, where did I get Occy? I actually picked Occy up from a breeder in South Australia. It was 9 hours drive from my house, and so I picked him up, took him to the beach the first day. We spent one night there and then we came back the next day. I've been asked, how did I get him used to the car? I think that made a... He's lying on the computer. Occy, down. Lay down, buddy. Lay down. So how did I get used to having Occy on the road? Occy, from his second day, as I said, I picked him up from the breeder in South Australia, and then on day 2, we drove back 9 hours. I was lucky enough that he just loved it from day 1. He came back in a crate that day, but even then, in 9 hours, we let him out to pee a couple of times, but otherwise he was just all smiles and he loved it. He's never had motion sickness. I think he just likes being one-on-one in the car with you. Okay, so next question is Occy short for something? Yes, it is. Occy's real name is actually Mark Occhilupo, and it was Chuck J89 that picked it. Mark Occhilupo is a famous Australian surfer. He's an absolute legend, one of the biggest surf comeback stories of all time, and he was my idol as a surfer, so that's where Occy got his name, and I'd love to meet him one day. So how did you train Occy to be so good off the leash all the time? I did put a lot of effort into training Occy when he was young. Knowing he was going to be a big dog, I really focused on obedience training and things early on. I think that made a huge difference. But to be honest with the off-leash thing, I think Occy and Australian Shepherds in general are such pack animals, and they generally have one person that they become very, very close to, and they almost become your shadow, and that has certainly been the case with Occy. So in terms of being off leash, he's always just never allowed himself to be a couple of 100 meters more away from me. He's always stuck close. He's never been one of those dogs that's just run away. So I guess I've had it a lot easier in that aspect. How did Occy adjust to van life? I actually think Occy adjusted to van life quicker than Lee and I did. When I was building out the van in Canada, Occy spent pretty much every minute of the build out within a meter or two of me, almost always sitting in the van or underneath it. He loves the van. I think he sees it as like a giant kennel for him, and it's a place of safety for him as well. So once we made the transition and moved into the van full time, the fact that Lee and I were always with him, he couldn't be happier, and he was so quick to be like, okay, this is my new life. In saying that, Occy seems to adjust quick to everything. He moved from Australia to Canada, and within a week he was like, oh yeah, this is snow for the first time, and was just so chill about it. Okay, so does Occy enjoy himself on this trip, or is he really just old and chill most of the time? I was kind of surprised I got this question for the Q&As. I think from our photos and videos we share, it should be pretty obvious that Occy absolutely loves this trip. I used to work as a paramedic and do long shifts where Occy would be in the backyard, he'd have toys to play with or whatever, but you could always tell he was sad when I was leaving. Now that we're on this trip, he's always with us, which he absolutely loves. But I think on top of that, every day he gets to meet new dogs. Every day he swims in a different area, He's always getting to do something different, and although the space of the van is not that large, we've always got the doors open, and he gets to explore different backyards every day. Okay, will you and Occy get lonely without Lee? Yeah, for sure. We definitely miss Lee, and the first couple of days Lee left, Occy moped big time. He just had his head down in the van. He was sad. But after that, once again being quick to adjust, he rebounded and he's already back, he was back to his normal self within a few days. In terms of us getting lonely as a collective, we miss her, but we haven't been lonely so far. She's been gone almost a month, and the reason for that being is thanks to, like the app, like iOverlander and those things, where wherever we camp, we're always camping around other people and we're engaging in other people all the time. And as we've spoken in other videos, one of the best things about van life is you can kind of be as social when you want to be and then introverted when you want to be as well, because you can just shut the doors to the van. I certainly haven't felt like I've lacked any social aspect. It's been a little bit quieter in the van than normal without Lee, but we'll be stoked to have her back, but I think we'll survive until she gets here. Okay. Will Occy be happier with more bed space now Lee's gone? I don't think he's happier with that, because he was quite happy snuggling up to Lee. He loved his morning and nighttime pats that he got off her. Most of the time he actually sleeps on the ground anyway. He prefers that, but I don't think he's that bothered to have more space. He'd rather have Lee back for sure. Okay, so one thing we get asked a lot about Occy being a thick-coated dog is, does he overheat in the hot temperatures down here in Central America and Mexico? I think I want to make a little disclaimer first, being that Occy is like my best friend, and he's also, I'm well aware he's my responsibility. If at any point I thought he was struggling or not happy or unhealthy because of his environment, I would take him out of it. I just wanted to make that clear, because I care so much about this little guy that I would never put him in those situations if I didn't think he could handle it and he was happy. So whether he actually does handle the heat, Occy for the first 5 years of his life lived as an outside dog in Australia. He's used to Australian summers that get over 40 degrees Celsius regularly. He actually copes really well with the heat. We've had a few people suggest that we shave him. Occy's a double-coated dog, like collies, German shepherds, huskies, and what the double coat actually means is that their outer layer is like an insulation layer, and that protects them from the heat and the cold the same. And then the inner layer is the part that sheds. With double-coated dogs, it can actually be dangerous to shave them because... Sit, buddy. It can actually be dangerous to shave them because their outer layer might not grow back, and therefore they lose that protection. That also protects them from bug bites and things as well. A lot of dog breeders actually don't suggest shaving double-coated dogs. What you do to help keep them cool is just make sure you continually brush them to help get rid of that inner coat. And we do that regularly. Dogs lose most of their heat through panting in their paws and also cooling off, and that's why we love taking him to the beach. But yeah, sorry, I know that was a bit of a long answer, but in short, Occy copes fine with the heat. In terms of it, I've had a few people comment that he pants a lot. Occy's always panted a lot. I think it's an Aussie Shepherd thing that gives them their smile that they've got. Even when Occy's in a climate-controlled house at 18 degrees, he pants exactly the same. So don't be too concerned, guys. I get him regular vet checks and he's healthy. And people can't actually believe that he's 7 years old because he looks like a puppy still. Okay. Does your little furry friend go everywhere with you, or can he be left alone in the van for short periods? Does it not get too hot without AC? So generally we try and take Occy everywhere with us, and the good thing about like Mexico and Central America is they seem to be a lot more accepting of dogs. We pretty much bring him into every restaurant, parks, everywhere. There's very few places that they don't allow dogs, and most of those we generally avoid. Say we need to go into a supermarket, for instance. Yes, we might leave him in the van for 15 or 20 minutes. What we do to make sure the van doesn't get too hot, and I think people need to realize there's a big difference between our van and a normal car. For starters, our van we insulated. We spent a week doing really good insulation in the van to keep heat out of it. We also put up the silver reflectic. We have the roof fan in the van that we always have on, and then we always have a bowl of water for him. these things, when you park the van in the shade, actually make the van cooler inside than it is outside. So I'm definitely not concerned at all for parking. Oh, and we have the windows down as well. I'm not at all concerned about him for that period of time. We also sit in the van with it fully shut up in the exact same situations, and we know for a fact that it doesn't get that hot. But it's definitely something to be mindful of. And yeah, I guess on the really, really hot days, we don't leave him in the van at all. How do you go about Occy's veterinary needs? Well, for starters, we've been lucky that Occy has actually very rarely ever needed a vet. In saying that, the times we have gone to a vet on this trip have mainly been to get health certificates and checks for border crossings. But like everywhere, there's vets in every town, all through Central America. I actually took him to one in Antigua just to see if I needed one for crossing from Guatemala to El Salvador. I mean, the nice thing about vets down here is they're much cheaper than back at home. They still have access to most of the same things. The app that we've talked so much about, iOverlander, actually often has vets listed on it that other travelers have been to, so you can read recommendations. And yeah, so finding a vet isn't an issue. And along those lines, another question was, how do we go finding dog food for Occy? The dog food down here that's available is very similar to the dog food that's available in Canada or the US or Australia. One thing that surprised me, but I guess shouldn't have, is that it's more expensive down here. That's actually because they're like, they're American brands or whatever, so they have to be imported. So it makes sense that they're going to be a little bit more expensive. Some of the better brands you might only get at veterinarians, but you'll generally find whatever dog food you need when you're down here. Okay, so how do you keep Occy safe from things that can affect dogs like rabies, ticks, fleas, snakes, etc.? So I'll tick them off one by one. Rabies, Occy's got a 3-year rabies vaccination, and that covers him from rabies completely. From ticks and leeches, Occy's got a Seresto collar on that he leaves on all the time. It's been really effective. He hasn't had ticks the whole time with that, and he also hasn't had fleas. So they're great. They last about 6 months at a time. We bought a couple of spares, so when it gets to that time frame, we can just put another one on. So for snakes, being from Australia, Occy's used to the danger of snakes. I think whenever we're in an area that is a potential for having snakes, like jungle or anything like that, the main thing we do is just keep him on a leash. Snakes are generally more afraid of us than we are of them, so as long as we keep him on a leash and he keeps a bit of distance, they're just going to try and give him as much space as possible. Okay. How do you manage Occy's grooming needs in such a small space? Bathing, shedding, nails, etc. So bathing, obviously his main bathing, like us, comes from being in the ocean. The salt water does a really good job of keeping him nice and clean. He also loves to lick himself clean like a cat every night. Shedding, as I said, we brush him regularly for that. It's good for him, but it's also good for us because otherwise he would leave a lot of hair in the car. Brushing him really keeps that down. And for his nails, it's exactly like you'd do at home. We just clip his nails when they get a bit too long. Has there been a time when Occy has kept you safe and has he warned you from danger, like barking or anything like that? Is he a good watchdog, or is he just a big softie? Occy can, he can get his hackles up when he needs to, and even though he looks like a teddy bear, I think he can still seem, I guess, intimidating. Especially people down here are generally a bit more scared of dogs. That's because there's so many street dogs that I guess aren't trained and can bite and may carry diseases. So in that regards, he is a good guard dog, because I feel like just his presence can make potential people that mean us harm or anything think twice. One situation which we haven't really ever gone into detail about, and we really should sometime because it's a pretty good story, but On our second night in the van, second night living in the van in London, Ontario, we actually had my mountain bike stolen off the back of the van. We were sleeping in the van at the time, and Occy was in the van, and he did not make a peep. He did not let us know at all. And when we realized the bike had been stolen, I actually jumped out of the van and chased the guy. I thought Occy was with me as my teammate. After running about 4 blocks, I turned around and realized Occy had actually stopped halfway along the chase to have a poo. So definitely not the best guard dog in those regards. But yeah, I feel like he definitely adds a certain factor. Okay, so in terms of paperwork, do we have a special passport for Occy to travel? No, I wish we did. I wish they made puppy passports. We do have a little booklet that's just got his, like a record of all his vaccinations, when he had them, everything. It's also got his microchip number. In terms of for border crossings, what you need to know, it varies crossing to crossing, but one thing I can say about Occy is that generally, in our experience, they've been really lax in terms of caring about Occy. I guess the main bit of paperwork that if they ask for any, they want to see is a valid rabies certificate, a microchip number, and a few places have asked for the evidence of a vet health check from the US. It's supposed to be within a year, but as you travel down, they're not going to care if it's a year and a half old or anything like that. Most of the people at border crossings have literally just glimpsed it and gone, yep, that's fine. In saying that, I don't know if it would be different if, say, you rescued a stray in Mexico. They might be a little bit more strict on seeing your paperwork. But for Occy, it's hardly been an issue. Some of them don't even look at him. Belize was the toughest border crossing. And if you're planning on crossing into Belize from Mexico, that one you actually have to apply online a week in advance. So just make sure you're onto that. Now, what are the sacrifices that Lee and I have had to make by having Occy with us on this trip? I'd say, like, the sacrifices we've had to make are kind of small, but it's things like, you know, losing some space in the van. Occy's essentially like having a third person in the van. He takes up quite a bit of space, so that's a bit of sacrifice. You lose space for dog food, his leashes, all that kind of thing. Another one would be certain hikes, especially in the US, you weren't allowed to bring Occy on. There was a couple of national parks in Canada you weren't allowed to bring him. You know, we were prepared to just not go on those things because we had Occy. We feel like the joy that Occy brings to our trip and the enjoyment we see him getting out of it just so far outweighs any sacrifices that we have to make to bring him along. And does Occy have to make any sacrifices being on the road? I guess not really. I mean, he often makes new friends, then all of a sudden has to leave them. But I feel like he's honestly one of the happiest dogs in the world, and I don't think he makes too many sacrifices for being on the road. What's the trick to having such a calm Aussie? Or did he just come that way? Occy definitely didn't come this calm. I think after about 3.5 years, I was like, when is this dog gonna just stop being a puppy? It was about 3.5 to 5 years he started to chill out. And I feel from 5 to 7, how old he is now, he's just the perfect balance of super chill most of the time and happy to relax or, you know, have a day just driving. But then when you want to do a 20-kilometer hike or, you know, hike up a volcano, Occy is all about it. He's got so much energy. I think he stays really fit from being in the van. But sorry, yeah, to get that question, he didn't just come as a chill dog, but he's definitely chill now, and yeah, I love his temperament. Do I have any tips for how I trained Occy? Because he's amazing pup and really chilled. As I said, he wasn't that chilled all the time. In terms of tips, like I said, I think for any dog, but especially a big dog, I think doing some obedience training when they're young is super important. I knew 8 weeks in advance I was going to get Occy, and whether it was over the top or not, but I actually got the book, a Cesar Millan dog training book called How to Raise the Perfect Puppy, and I read the whole thing before I picked him up, and I actually really followed that book. And it was things like, you know, you always eat before your dog, so they know you're like the alpha male in the pack. You always go through a door before they do. All things like that. That the thing with the dog is, if they don't know the sort of the pecking order of those around them, they can become really anxious in themselves because they're constantly trying to assert for dominance, and it's not good for the dog. So I just made sure from the start that he knew I was kind of the boss. He knew his place, and yeah, I just followed the tips out of that book to train him as he went. And you know, I'm pretty happy. He could definitely be more well trained, don't get me wrong, and I didn't do a perfect job, but I'm happy with how he is. And yeah, I would definitely recommend putting as much effort into training as you're prepared to. Okay, so final question. What are some tips you have for traveling with the dog? First off, as I just said, make sure you have them well trained if you can. You know, if you were constantly worried about your dog running off as soon as you open the door, it's going to make it so much harder to travel with them. Secondly, as I've mentioned, a dog needs their own space. When you design your van, if you're building your own, make space for the dog. Ensure that they're going to have somewhere comfortable to sit when you're driving. They're going to have somewhere comfortable to sit when you're cooking. You know, always think, just like you would think about your partner, or, you know, if someone else was going to be in the van, think about the dog too, and make sure that they're looked after. A third tip, one thing we didn't do for the first couple of months, have a non-spill water bowl. We had just a round bottom bowl for the first couple of months, and we spilt water everywhere. Definitely get onto that straight away, because it's so much better when they can't spill it. I guess a final tip would just be, you know, get them used to the car as much as you can before you're going to go on the trip. You don't want to take a dog that's never been on long rides. So maybe do some weekend road trips or anything. Oh, up. Oh, he's back for the final part. You know, do road trips or whatever, and yeah, get them used to the car. Okay guys, so that wraps up our Q&A for Occy. As I said, if I didn't answer your question, put them in the comments below. I really hope that this has encouraged you to make it think that it's not only possible, but it's a great idea to bring your dog on a trip like this. Occy adds so much joy to our life, and you know, to think of this trip without him, it wouldn't have been the same trip. He's added so much to it, and we just love having him along for the ride. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next week.